I spent my life showing up for this family. And in the end, they left me with what nobody wanted.
Everything she had ever counted on, taken in front of her eyes. Damon walked away with the fortune, every penny, every jewel, every family heirloom. And she got a falling-apart farmhouse nobody wanted. The lawyer called it property. Damon called it worthless. But to Loretta Vale, it felt like a final insult from a family that had already learned how to forget her. The farmhouse sat outside Columbia, Tennessee, with a sagging porch, a leaking roof, and one locked sewing room no one had opened since Grandma Odette died. Damon smiled as the rusted key was placed in Loretta's hand. Then he leaned close and said she had always been good at keeping useless things. No one corrected him. No one even looked ashamed. But tied to that key was a faded cloth tag, written in Grandma Odette's own hand. For Loretta, she will understand why. That night, rain slid down the farmhouse windows as Loretta stood inside the sewing room alone. Behind the old wallpaper, her fingers found a raised seam, a hidden edge, a door inside the wall. And when it opened, the ruined house Damon laughed at became the one thing he should have feared. Subscribe now so you can follow Loretta as she uncovers the secrets hidden inside Grandma Odette's farmhouse. The wall did not open all the way at first. Loretta Vale stood in Grandma Odette's sewing room, with one hand pressed against the peeling wallpaper, and the other holding the rusted key Damon had laughed at only hours earlier. The hidden seam had shifted beneath her fingers, not much, just enough to prove it was real, just enough to make her forget the rain dripping through the back gutter, forget the ache in her knees, forget the cruel little smile Damon wore when the lawyer handed her the key. For a moment, Loretta did not pull again. She only stood there, breathing carefully, as if the whole farmhouses might hear her. That morning, she had arrived with 2 suitcases and a cardboard box on the passenger seat. Inside the box were her medicines, a framed picture of Warren, and a folded sweater that still smelled faintly of cedar from her old closet. The farmhouse sat outside Columbia, Tennessee, pushed back from the road behind weeds, leaning fence posts, and a mailbox with Grandma Odette's name almost washed away. It looked exactly like Damon said it did, forgotten, expensive to repair, too tired to save. The porch sagged in the middle. The front steps dipped under Loretta's weight. One upstairs window had been patched with cardboard from the inside. The white paint had peeled down to gray wood, and old leaves were packed thick along the foundation. Anyone driving past would have seen a burden. Loretta saw something harder, a life nobody had bothered to protect. Inside, the air smelled of dust, rainwater, and closed rooms. The kitchen floor had softened near the sink. A cabinet door hung crooked. In the parlor, Grandma's old chair sat beside the window, turned slightly toward the road, as if she had spent her last years watching for someone who never came. Loretta touched the chair, but did not sit. She was afraid if she sat down, the weight of the day might settle too deeply. Damon had taken the fortune. But this had taken her breath. Not because it was beautiful, because it still felt occupied by things left unsaid. She moved slowly from room to room, careful with each step. In the hallway, she found a small line scratched into the doorframe near the sewing room. It was not damage from age. It was too straight, too deliberate. Her thumb passed over it once, then again. Beneath the scratch, written so faintly she almost missed it, were 2 tiny initials, W.V., Warren Vale, her husband. Loretta's chest tightened. Warren had stood in this hallway years ago, fixing a loose hinge for Grandma Odette. He had come home quiet that evening. When Loretta asked what was wrong, he only said one sentence. Odette keeps more than quilts in that room. Now his initials were beside the very door she had avoided. The sewing room waited at the end of the hall, closed and still. Loretta opened it just before sunset. Dust floated in the light. The old machine sat by the window. A basket of quilt squares rested on a chair. Everything looked ordinary until her hand found the raised seam behind the wallpaper. Now, standing before that hidden edge, Loretta pulled the paper back another inch and stopped. There, written on the wood beneath the wallpaper, in Grandma Odette's careful hand, were 4 words that made the farmhouse feel suddenly less empty. Do not trust Damon. Loretta stepped back. The wall had not opened yet, but Grandma had already started speaking. Loretta held the smaller brass key in her hand, the one Grandma Odette had left tucked inside the wall seam, and felt the weight of decades pressing against her chest. She did not open the sewing room yet, not fully. Something told her to wait, to let the house speak first. She walked slowly through the farmhouse, her steps careful on the creaking floors. Every room told a story. The kitchen smelled faintly of damp wood and old herbs. A cabinet door hung crooked, swinging slightly as she passed. The living room carpet was threadbare, worn where Grandma's feet had once pressed. Dust floated in sunbeams cutting through cracked windows. It felt almost sacred. Loretta ran her fingers along the edges of the old furniture. The armchair in the corner still had the faint imprint of Grandma Odette's weight, as if she had just stepped away. A basket of quilt squares sat in the parlor, colors faded, yet carefully stacked. The house remembered, she realized. Every small detail had been preserved, intentionally, lovingly, as if someone had known she would return. She paused in the hallway, staring at the sewing room door again. The wallpaper bubbled slightly near the seam. The faint hollow sound from the panel tugged at her curiosity. Her hand brushed the initials Warren had carved into the frame. She remembered the words he had whispered years ago about Grandma keeping more than quilts in that room. A sudden noise made her start. A loose shutter rattled against the wall as the wind moved through the broken window panes. Rain had begun again, soft at first, then harder, tapping against the roof. Loretta's heartbeat quickened. Every sound in the farmhouse now seemed amplified, the house alive with quiet warnings. Her eyes wandered to the small brass key again. It felt heavier now, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. A secret, a legacy. Something her brother Damon had never imagined and perhaps never would. Loretta knelt, pressing the key against the seam. The hollow sound was clearer this time, a faint echo that seemed almost like a pulse. She traced the edges of the panel again and noticed something she hadn't before. A tiny scratch near the bottom corner, a mark too deliberate to be old damage. Someone had tried to reach inside. Recently, her mind raced. Had Damon suspected this? Had Warren known and tried to leave her clues? Every discovery made her feel closer, and yet further from the truth at the same time. The house was whispering to her in its own way, revealing just enough to keep her moving, but withholding the full story. She stood, brushing dust from her hands, and looked around the hallway. The farmhouse seemed smaller, yet more significant. Every step, every beam, every faded photograph now carried meaning. This was not just a house, it was a witness, a keeper. And as Loretta's fingers hovered over the raised seam once more, she noticed something else. A faint edge of paper peeking out behind the panel. Not the envelope she had seen before, something smaller, almost hidden. Her breath caught. She knew this was deliberate. A message, a clue, waiting for her to notice. And in that moment, the farmhouse seemed to lean closer, urging her forward, testing her patience, her curiosity, her courage. Loretta swallowed, steadying her pulse. The hidden room had not yet revealed itself fully, but something had changed. The house had acknowledged her, and she was ready to answer. What was hidden behind that seam, and who had been watching her all these years? The first clue had been found, but the truth was still waiting, just out of reach. Loretta held the smaller brass key in her hand, the one Grandma Odette had left tucked inside the wall seam, and felt the weight of decades pressing against her chest. She did not open the sewing room yet, not fully. Something told her to wait, to let the house speak first. She walked slowly through the farmhouse, her steps careful on the creaking floors. Every room told a story. The kitchen smelled faintly of damp wood and old herbs. A cabinet door hung crooked, swinging slightly as she passed. The living room carpet was threadbare, worn where Grandma's feet had once pressed. Dust floated in sunbeams cutting through cracked windows. It felt almost sacred. Loretta ran her fingers along the edges of the old furniture. The armchair in the corner still had the faint imprint of Grandma Odette's weight, as if she had just stepped away. A basket of quilt squares sat in the parlor, colors faded, yet carefully stacked. The house remembered, she realized. Every small detail had been preserved, intentionally, lovingly, as if someone had known she would return. She paused in the hallway, staring at the sewing room door again. The wallpaper bubbled slightly near the seam. The faint hollow sound from the panel tugged at her curiosity. Her hand brushed the initials Warren had carved into the frame. She remembered the words he had whispered years ago about Grandma keeping more than quilts in that room. A sudden noise made her start. A loose shutter rattled against the wall as the wind moved through the broken window panes. Rain had begun again, soft at first, then harder, tapping against the roof. Loretta's heartbeat quickened. Every sound in the farmhouse now seemed amplified, the house alive with quiet warnings. Her eyes wandered to the small brass key again. It felt heavier now, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. A secret, a legacy. Something her brother Damon had never imagined and perhaps never would. Loretta knelt, pressing the key against the seam. The hollow sound was clearer this time, a faint echo that seemed almost like a pulse. She traced the edges of the panel again and noticed something she hadn't before. A tiny scratch near the bottom corner, a mark too deliberate to be old damage. Someone had tried to reach inside. Recently, her mind raced. Had Damon suspected this? Had Warren known and tried to leave her clues? Every discovery made her feel closer, and yet further from the truth at the same time. The house was whispering to her in its own way, revealing just enough to keep her moving, but withholding the full story. She stood, brushing dust from her hands, and looked around the hallway. The farmhouse seemed smaller, yet more significant. Every step, every beam, every faded photograph now carried meaning. This was not just a house, it was a witness, a keeper. And as Loretta's fingers hovered over the raised seam once more, she noticed something else. A faint edge of paper peeking out behind the panel. Not the envelope she had seen before, something smaller, almost hidden. Her breath caught. She knew this was deliberate. A message, a clue, waiting for her to notice. And in that moment the farmhouse seemed to lean closer, urging her forward, testing her patience, her curiosity, her courage. Loretta swallowed, steadying her pulse. The hidden room had not yet revealed itself fully, but something had changed. The house had acknowledged her, and she was ready to answer. What was hidden behind that seam, and who had been watching her all these years? The first clue had been found, but the truth was still waiting, just out of reach. The edge of paper behind the panel was so thin, Loretta almost mistook it for old wallpaper. She stood in the hallway, one hand against the sewing room wall, the smaller brass key warm in her palm. The rain had softened outside, but inside the farmhouse every sound felt closer. The floor settling, the shutter tapping, her own breathing. She pulled gently at the paper. It did not come free at first. Something inside the wall held it in place, as if Grandma Odette had tucked it there with care, not panic. Loretta leaned closer, her shoulder brushing the peeling wallpaper. The faint smell of dust and old glue rose into the air. Her fingers worked slowly, careful not to tear what might be the first real answer this house had given her. At last, the paper slipped loose. It was not a letter. It was a small hand-drawn map. The lines were simple, a hallway. The back wall, a square marked in pencil. And beneath that square, 2 words written in Grandma Odette's hand. Second lock. Loretta looked at the brass key, then back at the map. The hidden panel was not the entrance. It was only the first step. That realization made the farmhouse feel larger than it had a moment before. Damon had called it useless. But useless things did not have hidden maps. Useless houses did not hold warnings behind wallpaper. Useless rooms did not keep keys inside walls with Warren's name tied to them. Loretta stepped into the sewing room again. The room held its breath around her. The old treadle machine sat near the window. A basket of quilt squares rested beside it. On the far wall, faded floral wallpaper curled at the corners. The cabinet she had moved earlier stood crooked, leaving a pale rectangle on the floor where it had protected the wood from dust. She followed the map with her eyes. Hallway, door, back wall, square there. Behind the sewing machine, low to the floor, the wallpaper pattern changed slightly. Not enough for anyone careless to notice. One small flower faced the wrong direction. Grandma Odette had hidden the sign in plain sight. Loretta lowered herself carefully to her knees. Pain moved through her joints, sharp and familiar, but she did not stop. She placed one hand on the floor to steady herself, then reached toward the mismatched flower. The paper gave under her touch, not tearing, pressing inward. A soft click sounded inside the wall. Loretta froze. For a second, nothing moved. Then a narrow wooden strip beside the baseboard loosened, leaving a dark opening no wider than her hand. Inside was a small iron lock, old, blackened, waiting. Loretta slid the brass key into it. It fit. Her heart began to beat so hard she felt it in her throat. The key turned with a rough scrape. Then the back wall shifted, only an inch at first, then 2. A cold draft moved through the gap, carrying the smell of paper, cedar, and something faintly metallic. like old filing cabinets shut away for years. Loretta held the edge of the wall and pulled. The hidden door opened inward. Behind it was not a closet. It was a narrow room, long and quiet. Shelves climbed both walls. Metal boxes sat in careful rows. Cloth-wrapped bundles were stacked by size. A wooden desk stood at the far end beneath a small square vent. On the desk sat a glass jar filled with old pencils, a dry ink pad, and a lamp with no bulb. Everything was dusty, but nothing looked abandoned. That was what unsettled Loretta most. This room had not been forgotten. It had been protected. She stepped inside slowly, one hand touching the wall to keep her balance. The floor was firmer here than in the kitchen. The shelves were raised from the ground. Each box had a handwritten label, some names she knew, some she did not. Church families, adoptions, war letters, county copies, widow's claims. Then on the desk, Loretta saw a sealed envelope. Her name was written across it. Not quickly, not shakily, carefully, as if Grandma Odette had sat in that chair and imagined this exact moment. Loretta picked it up with both hands. For a while she could not open it. She thought of Damon walking away with the fortune. She thought of Warren's initials in the hallway. She thought of Grandma sitting alone in this farmhouse, guarding a room no one knew existed. Then she broke the seal. Inside was one page. The first line made her knees weaken. Loretta, if you are standing in this room, then Damon has already taken what he was meant to take. She read it twice. The words did not comfort her. They warned her. Grandma Odette had known Damon would take the fortune. Maybe she had even allowed it. And if that was true, then the ruined farmhouse had never been Loretta's leftover inheritance. It had been a trapdoor into the truth. At the bottom of the letter, Grandma had written one final instruction. Do not open the Vale shelf first. Start with the forgotten names. Loretta lifted her eyes. Along the right wall, one shelf was marked with her family name, Vale, but beside it stood dozens of other boxes. And every one of them carried a name that looked like it had been waiting years to be spoken again. Loretta obeyed Grandma Odette's instruction. She did not touch the Vale shelf, not yet. The family name sat there on the right wall, bold in black pencil, close enough for her to reach. But Grandma had warned her plainly, start with the forgotten names. So Loretta turned away from her own bloodline and faced the other shelves. For a long moment she simply stood in the secret room, listening to the quiet. It was different from the silence in the rest of the farmhouse. The kitchen felt abandoned. The parlor felt tired. The hallway felt wounded. But this room felt guarded. Every box had been placed with care. Every label had been written by hand. Every bundle was tied with cotton string, not tape, as if Grandma Odette had known that one day the paper would need to survive another pair of hands. Loretta reached for the first box. The label read Church Records, 1954 to 1968. The lid resisted, then lifted with a dry scrape. Inside were folded papers, old copies, yellowed index cards, and a small notebook wrapped in a flour sack cloth. Loretta picked up the notebook first. Names filled the pages, births, baptisms, marriages, burials. Dates written carefully beside each one. Some entries had notes beside them. Original, lost in flood. Copy made before courthouse transfer. Pastor gave this to me for safekeeping. Family must be told if they come asking. Loretta sat slowly in the wooden chair, her breath caught. These were not random memories, they were proofs. Proof that someone had been born. Proof that someone had married. Proof that someone had belonged to a family, a church, a place. She opened another box, letters from women. Inside were envelopes tied in bundles. Some were written in neat handwriting, some in shaky script. Some had no return address. Many began with the same kind of words. Miss Odette, please keep this safe. Loretta did not read every letter. She knew enough to understand that some pain deserved privacy, even in discovery. But a few lines met her eyes. A woman asking Grandma to hold a copy of her marriage paper because her husband's family denied the union. Another asking her to keep a photograph of a child placed for adoption. A widow leaving a note about land she had been told she never had a right to claim. Loretta's hand went still. This was why the room felt heavy, not with money, with trust. People had brought their most fragile truths to Grandma Odette, and Grandma had hidden them where greedy hands would not think to look. Loretta moved to another shelf, war letters. Inside were envelopes from Korea and Vietnam, some opened, some sealed, some returned, some never mailed. Each one had a note from Grandma explaining who had given it to her and why. One small bundle was marked for his son if he ever asks. Loretta closed her eyes. She thought of Damon calling this place worthless. She thought of him standing in that lawyer's office with clean shoes and a satisfied face. He had looked at the farmhouse and seen rot. Grandma had looked at it and built a shelter for truth. The room seemed to expand around Loretta as she opened more boxes, adoption notes, land receipts, county copies, widow's claims, family photographs, unidentified. Each label opened another question. Who had been denied? Who had been erased? Who had come here quietly, trusting an old woman at a kitchen table more than any office in town? Then Loretta found a smaller box near the back. It was not on a shelf. It was tucked beneath the desk, wrapped in brown paper and tied with a blue ribbon faded almost gray. The label made her stop. First returned name. Loretta untied it carefully. Inside was a photograph of a young woman standing beside Grandma Odette near the farmhouse porch. Behind it was a folded letter written decades earlier. The woman had been searching for proof of who her mother was. Grandma had found it. Grandma had returned her name to her, and beneath the letter was a note in Grandma's handwriting. A name can be stolen without anyone raising a hand. Giving it back is holy work. Loretta held the paper close. For the first time since the will reading, the farmhouse did not feel like a punishment. It felt like a responsibility. And that frightened her more than poverty ever had. Because responsibility meant choice. She could close the room. She could pretend she had found nothing. She could let Damon keep the fortune and the family story. Or she could begin opening names that had waited longer than she had. Then something shifted outside the secret room. Not inside the wall, not from the wind, from the hallway. A floorboard creaked. Loretta froze. She had locked the front door. She was sure of it. The paper trembled in her hand as she turned toward the narrow opening. And from somewhere beyond the sewing room door, the old farmhouse gave one slow, careful sound, as if someone had stepped inside. Loretta did not move. She stood inside the secret room with the brown paper note in her hand, listening. The floorboard outside gave another soft groan. Not the kind old houses made when wind pressed against them. This sound had weight, a person's weight. Loretta looked toward the narrow opening in the wall. The sewing room beyond it was dim gray with late afternoon rain. The old machine sat by the window like a shadow. The quilt basket rested where Grandma Odette had left it. Then the front door rattled. Loretta's heart jumped. A key scraped against the lock. For one terrible second she thought of Damon. She pictured him stepping inside with that smooth voice, pretending concern while his eyes searched the walls. But the lock did not turn. Whoever stood outside did not have the right key. The handle shook once more, then silence. Loretta waited until her legs began to ache. Only when she heard gravel crunch outside and a vehicle pull away did she step carefully out of the secret room and into the sewing room. She crossed the house slowly. At the front door, a folded paper had been pushed through the mail slot. It lay on the floor like a warning. Loretta picked it up. No envelope, no signature. Only one sentence typed in dark ink. Old papers can hurt living people. Leave them alone. The words were not loud. That made them worse. Someone already knew. Someone knew she had found something. Loretta locked the door again, then checked it twice. Her hand trembled, but her face stayed calm. She had spent too many years swallowing fear to let it rule her now. She carried the note back to the sewing room. The secret room seemed different when she entered again. Less like a discovery. More like a responsibility with danger attached. Her eyes went to the right wall. The shelf-marked veil waited where Grandma had told her not to begin. But the warning at the door had changed something. If someone wanted these papers left alone, then the reason might be sitting on that shelf. Loretta reached for the box marked Warren. For a moment, she only held it. Her husband's name, written in Grandma Odette's hand, looked painfully gentle. Warren Vale had been gone for years, but his absence still lived in small places, the empty side of the bed, the coffee mug Loretta could never throw away, the way she still turned sometimes to tell him something before remembering there was no one there. She opened the lid. Inside were folders, neat, dry, protected. The first folder held copies of letters Warren had written to the Maury County Records Office years earlier. His handwriting was steady, clear, patient. He had asked about missing church land records. He had asked why certain family filings had been moved. He had asked why a property receipt Grandma Odette remembered signing no longer appeared in the public file. Loretta read each line slowly. This was not confusion, this was care. The next folder held a copy of a public notice from years ago. Damon's name appeared near the bottom, connected to a filing request Loretta had never seen. Her throat tightened. Damon had claimed he knew nothing about those records, but here was his name, not rumored, not remembered, written. Then Loretta found the clipping, old newspaper, folded in half. The headline was small, but the damage had lasted for years. It described Warren as a local man causing trouble over misplaced records. It said officials found no reason for concern. It quoted an unnamed family source saying grief and age had made Warren suspicious. Loretta knew who that source had been. She did not need a name. Beside the clipping, Grandma Odette had written 7 words in blue ink. He was not wrong. He was early. Loretta pressed the paper to her chest. For years, Damon's version of Warren had stood in public while the truth stayed locked away. Now the truth was in her hands, but at the bottom of the box, beneath the folders, was a small cassette tape. A strip of masking tape crossed the front. On it, Grandma had written, "Play this only after the first warning." Loretta looked toward the front door, toward the typed note lying on the desk. Then she placed the cassette into the old recorder beside the lamp. The machine clicked, hissed, and Grandma Odette's voice filled the hidden room, soft, tired, and afraid. "Loretta, if someone has warned you already, then Damon knows the room is open." Loretta sat in the quiet of the hidden room, the cassette tape still whispering Grandma Odette's voice. A soft warning about Damon, about timing, about patience. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted Warren's folders, placing them carefully back in the box. The room was still, except for the low hum of the old heater struggling against the chill of the farmhouse. For a long moment she did nothing. She only listened. The farmhouse had been silent when she arrived. Now it felt alive, waiting. Each creak, each breath of wind seemed to carry meaning, a signal that she was not alone in this task, that someone else would be affected by what she found here. Loretta remembered Grandma's instructions. Start with the forgotten names. Not her family first, but others who had been erased, overlooked, abandoned. She turned to the first labeled box, not marked Vale. Top envelope was fragile, yellowed, tied with a string that had softened with age. Inside was a collection of letters and papers connected to a woman named Evelyn Shaw. The name rang a bell. Loretta recalled the quiet woman at the county church, now in her 80s, who once mentioned she had never located proof of her parents' marriage after a courthouse fire decades ago. Careful not to disturb more than necessary, Loretta gathered the papers. She folded them gently, tracing the edges as if to memorize their shape, their weight. Then she found a notebook with family records Evelyn had submitted over the years. Every entry, every date, every signature, preserved by Grandma Odette, waiting for someone who would care enough to restore it. Loretta took a deep breath. She had never been a public person, never been loud, never demanded attention. But this was different. These papers carried lives, real lives, families whose stories had been lost, and she had the power to return them. She drove to Evelyn's home the next morning. The old woman opened the door, hesitant, cautious, not knowing what might be coming. Loretta introduced herself, holding the fragile stack of envelopes like a sacred offering. Evelyn's eyes widened as she recognized the handwriting of Grandma Odette, then the papers themselves. She did not cry. Not at first. She simply covered her mouth with one hand, trembling. Words failed her. Years of missing proof and lost names suddenly restored. A small, almost imperceptible smile broke across her face. Evelyn whispered, almost to herself, "Grandma kept it." All these years, Loretta nodded, letting the weight of it sink in. This was why the house had been waiting. Why the keys had been meaningless without action. This was why Damon had never imagined it. Because what he saw as useless was actually the heartbeat of truth. When Loretta returned to the farmhouse later that afternoon, she noticed something in the driveway. A car she did not recognize, slow, watching. The gravel crunched lightly under tires that paused too long near the gate. Someone had seen Evelyn arrive. Someone had realized the farmhouse was no longer empty. Loretta's pulse quickened. She stepped back into the secret room, letting the door click softly behind her. Each shelf, each box seemed to lean closer now, as if urging her to continue, to open more names, to protect the truths she had been given. And as her eyes rested on the Vale shelf at the far end of the room, she felt a chill. That shelf would have to wait. The others needed her first. But someone else was watching, waiting, and she knew without doubt that Damon would not remain ignorant for long. What else had Grandma hidden here, and how far would Damon go to stop her from revealing it? The first person had been helped, but the story of the farmhouse was only beginning. The next morning, the farmhouse felt heavier. Loretta could hear the wind through the broken windows, but it was not just the weather that made the boards groan. Something in the house seemed to anticipate what was coming. Damon had called the night before. His voice was calm, almost concerned. "Loretta," he said, "you shouldn't be handling those papers alone. The house is unstable, someone could get hurt, maybe even you." He made it sound reasonable, caring even. But Loretta knew the undertone. He wanted the boxes untouched, the shelves unopened, the secrets left buried. By mid-morning, a letter arrived, legacies printed neatly on crisp stationery. Someone had reported structural concerns, Damon claimed. An inspector would arrive at 11. Loretta stood at the door, the envelope clutched in one hand, the smaller brass key in the other. Her heart beat steadily. She had feared Damon's anger before, but this was subtle, strategic, calculated. The inspector came as promised. He wore a standard uniform, clipboard in hand. He walked through the rooms, tapping floors, examining ceilings. He noted a weak porch beam, minor mold behind the pantry, and a small leak in the back roof. All of it real, all of it minor, but Damon had turned reality into a threat. Loretta nodded respectfully, asked a few questions, and promised to repair the issues. Inside, her mind raced. She had not rushed to open every box before. She would not now. But she could not let Damon's pressure stop her either. Later, she contacted Marion Bell, the retired librarian who had once worked with Grandma Odette. Marion arrived in the late afternoon, bringing her clipboard, gloves, and careful eyes. She knelt beside a stack of boxes and whispered instructions. "Sort by year," Marion said, "fragile items at the top. Handle the letters with care. Never touch seals until the family history is ready to be revealed properly." Loretta followed each step. Her hands were steady, her chest tight, but her resolve firm. She realized something important. Damon's tactics were clever, but he underestimated her patience. Her strength was not in shouting. It was in careful persistence. As Marion worked, Loretta's eyes drifted to the Vale shelf at the far end of the room. She had not opened it yet. She knew she must wait. Grandma Odette's instructions were clear. Every delay carried meaning. Outside, the wind picked up. The inspector returned briefly to verify the porch, but Loretta noticed a shadow near the gate. Someone was watching. Not a neighbor, not a passerby, a figure waiting. Up observing, maybe counting on fear to push her hand away from the boxes. The cassette played softly in the corner. Grandma Odette's voice still echoed faintly, reminding Loretta of the responsibilities she carried. Every name, every paper, every envelope, proof of lives that had been erased. She bent over a bundle of letters, carefully untying the string. Inside were marriage certificates that had been lost, adoption papers that had never reached families, and photographs of children no one remembered. Loretta felt their weight, not as objects, but as trust. A sudden creak from the hallway made her start. She glanced up. The front door was still closed. The shadow she had seen moved again. She could not identify it, but she knew it had noticed her activity. Damon's influence was wider than she had imagined. He did not need to enter the house to control it. His presence was in the threat of inspection, the legal letters in the eyes she could not see. Loretta swallowed. She would not be intimidated. She would continue carefully, methodically. But she also knew the danger was real. Someone was waiting for her to make a mistake. She returned to the Vale shelf. Her hands hovered over the boxes marked with family names. Not yet. She focused on the other archives first. Each name restored, each paper preserved, was a step toward reclaiming what Damon wanted hidden. And then, something small slid from the top of one of the boxes, a note, old and yellowed. The handwriting was unmistakable. Grandma Odette had left it for her, in case the first warnings were not enough. Loretta picked it up slowly. She read the words twice. "Patience, Loretta. They are watching. Let them wait." Her heart thumped. Someone outside was watching. Damon knew more than she thought, and yet she held the first moves of a game that no one else understood. She breathed in slowly, resting the note on the desk. The farmhouse had shifted again, from a building of dust and memories into a battlefield where silence and patience would become weapons. And Loretta knew, as she glanced toward the hallway and the hidden panel, that the next move would change everything if she dared to take it. Damon did not come to the farmhouse the way she had imagined. No storming, no shouting, no slamming doors. He came in polished shoes and a calm voice, the kind that made everything sound reasonable. "Loretta," he said as she arranged papers from the hidden room on the desk, "I've been thinking. Perhaps we can make this easier for both of us." He stepped closer, carrying an envelope, thick, heavy, the weight of money. "Sell the farmhouse," he said, "everything inside. I'll pay you more than you've ever seen in your life." Loretta's hands froze on a folded marriage certificate. She did not speak. She only felt the paper tremble slightly beneath her fingers. Damon continued. "Enough to repair your life, pay off debts, rent a comfortable place in town, start fresh, no more stress. No more worry." It was tempting, almost dangerously so. The farmhouse roof leaked. The walls groaned with age. She was tired. Her knees ached. Her body reminded her she was no longer the woman who could lift heavy boxes without consequence. She looked at the envelope. She could feel the money inside, cold, crisp, and real. But then he said the conditions. All the papers, every envelope, every box from the hidden room. Turn them over to my attorney. Sign a confidentiality agreement. Do not contact anyone listed in the archive. Seal everything concerning Warren Vale. Loretta's throat went dry. Not the money, not the comfort, not the freedom. The last line struck her like a blow. Seal Warren's truth. Stop telling his story. Let Damon control the history he had stolen, just as he had controlled the fortune. She could feel the weight of every life hidden in that room, every forgotten name, every erased document, waiting for someone to defend them, waiting for her. The temptation pressed against her. She could sign, take the envelope, leave the farmhouse behind, never look back, easy, comfortable, quiet. And she could let Warren's name vanish into Damon's version of history forever. Loretta closed her eyes. She thought of the first woman she had helped, Evelyn Shaw, the tremble in her hands when the papers confirmed her parents' marriage. The relief that came from proof returned. She thought of Warren, the way Damon had labeled him confused, discredited, forgotten. And she thought of Grandma Odette, the patient eyes, the careful hands, the secret room built to survive greed. Loretta opened her eyes slowly. She looked at Damon's polished shoes, at the smooth envelope in his hand. She saw the truth beneath the offer. This was never about money. This was about silence, control, erasure. Her fingers moved to the edge of the veil shelf, not yet opening it. She had more work to do, more people to help, more truth to uncover. Damon's face tightened. He realized she would not yield. His offer now hung between them. A trap disguised as generosity, Loretta inhaled. She could feel the farmhouse around her, the walls, the shelves, the hidden seams, all of them witnesses to the choice she was making. And then she smiled slightly. No, she would not sell. She would not silence history. She would not let Damon rewrite what Grandma Odette had protected. But before she could say anything aloud, a knock sounded from the front door, slow, careful, expectant. Someone else had arrived at the farmhouse, and they were holding a key that Loretta had not expected. The knock did not come again. It waited. Loretta stood in the sewing room with Damon's offer still lying on the desk, thick with money, heavy with silence. Damon turned toward the front of the house first. For once he looked uncertain. Loretta walked past him without a word. Her hand rested on the wall as she crossed the hallway, steadying herself against the old boards beneath her feet. The farmhouse seemed to hold its breath with her. When she opened the front door, Marion Bell stood on the porch. The retired librarian was wrapped in a dark coat, rain beating on her shoulders. In one hand she held a small brown envelope, in the other an old key, not Loretta's farmhouse key, not the brass key from the wall. This one was flat and silver, stamped with a bank number nearly rubbed away by time. Marion's face was pale. She did not step inside right away. She only said that Grandma Odette had left something with her years ago, with instructions to bring it to Loretta only if Damon ever tried to buy the farmhouse. Behind Loretta, Damon went still. That was the first answer. He knew enough to be afraid. Marion came inside slowly. Her shoes left damp marks on the old floor. She placed the envelope on the sewing room desk beside Damon's untouched money. The envelope was sealed with tape so old it had yellowed at the edges. Across the front, Grandma Odette had written, "If he offers money, he has found the wound." Loretta sat down before opening it. She had learned by now that Grandma's words never arrived empty. Inside was a bank deposit box receipt, a short letter, and one folded statement signed by Grandma Odette, Marion Bell, and Warren Vale. Warren's name stopped the room. Even Damon looked at it. The statement was dated years before Warren died. It explained that Warren had discovered altered filings connected to old family records and community claims. It explained that Damon had requested access to documents he later denied seeing. It explained that Grandma Odette had copied everything she could because she believed the official record could no longer be trusted. Loretta read slowly, no shouting, no dramatic collapse, just the sound of paper moving in an old room, and a woman finally seeing the shape of the truth that had followed her husband into his grave. At the bottom of the page, Warren had written one line in his own hand. "If I am gone before this is settled, let Loretta decide what is right." Loretta pressed her fingers to the words. For years, Damon had made Warren sound unstable, confused, bitter. Now Warren's own handwriting stood steady in front of them all. Damon tried to speak. Marion stopped him with one quiet sentence. The original copies were already with an attorney. That changed everything. Damon's money no longer looked powerful. It looked desperate. Over the next week, the farmhouse changed. Not all at once, and not like a fairy tale. The porch still sagged. The roof still needed repairs. The rooms still smelled of dust, cedar, and rain. But people began coming. Carefully. Respectfully. Evelyn Shaw returned with her granddaughter and a folder of family photographs. A retired church deacon came with an old register that matched Grandma's copies. A former county clerk admitted Warren had asked questions no dishonest man would have known to ask. One by one, the forgotten names began finding their way home. Not every box could be opened publicly. Loretta understood that. Some truths needed permission. Some letters belonged only to families. Some wounds could not be turned into town gossip. That was why people trusted her. She did not use the room to shame the dead. She used it to return dignity to the living. Marion helped her create an inventory. A local attorney helped protect the sensitive papers. Volunteers repaired the porch rails and covered the broken upstairs window. The old sewing room became the first protected space in the house, with a lock, a table, gloves, folders, and a small sign handwritten by Loretta herself. Names are handled here with care. Damon's version of the family story began to weaken quietly. Not in one explosive courtroom scene, in a slower, more painful way. People stopped repeating his words. They stopped calling Warren confused. They stopped treating Loretta like the woman who had been left with scraps. The estate was reviewed. The documents Damon had tried to seal became part of a formal challenge. He did not lose everything overnight, but he lost the thing he had protected most fiercely, control. And for a man like Damon, that was the one fortune he could not bear to surrender. Weeks later, Loretta stood alone in the secret room. Morning light slipped through the small vent near the ceiling. It touched the shelves, the labeled boxes, the desk where Grandma Odette must have sat through countless quiet evenings. Loretta held Warren's photograph in one hand. For years, she had not been able to defend him with anything stronger than love. Now she had truth. And somehow, truth felt gentler than revenge. She placed his photograph beside Grandma's letter, then looked around the narrow room. This was what Damon had missed. Not because it was hidden too well, because he had never valued the kind of things kept here. Names, promises, witnesses, the handwriting of people who had no power except memory. The farmhouse was no longer just Grandma Odette's ruined property outside Columbia, Tennessee. It became a small living archive, a place where older women came to help sort records, where families found missing pieces, where Warren's name was spoken with respect again, where Loretta was no longer pitied for what she had received. She was honored for what she protected. On the first day the front room opened to the community, Loretta stood on the repaired porch. Her gray cardigan moved softly in the wind. The same key Damon had laughed at rested in her palm. It was still rusted, still plain, still worth nothing to a man who only understood money. But to Loretta, it no longer felt like the last thing she had been given. It felt like the first thing Grandma trusted her to carry. Damon took the fortune everyone could see. But Loretta found the room where Grandma Odette had hidden the truth no amount of money could buy. And in the end, the ruined farmhouse did not make Loretta rich in the way Damon understood. It gave her something better. Her husband's name, her grandmother's purpose, her own place in the story, and the quiet dignity of knowing she had not been left behind. she had been chosen. If Loretta's courage moved you, please like this video and subscribe for more stories of forgotten people finding their strength again. And tell us in the comments, would you have taken Damon's money or protected the truth inside the farmhouse? Thank you for watching to the end.